welcome to my younger self 2023 cohort's first panel. So we're very excited. The organizing committee here, Rachel, Shika, Shirin, and myself, we're very excited to host our first panel for this cohort. And we have wonderful speakers today. We're very excited to get started. And the topic of today is collaborating within academia and with industry partners. So here are our distinguished panelists. We're very grateful that they are here today: Jennifer Mason-Lobo, Fran Berman, and Julie Swan. So without further ado, I'll just set the stage, and we'll start with Jennifer for 10 minutes, then with Fran and Julie, and afterwards we will have a Q&A session where we can ask questions to our panelists. So as you know, our first kickoff meeting, we touched base on networks, the importance of networks, and one of the main goals of this program really is to create a network for our PhD students in IE, OR, MS domain, and help them to develop networks, and hopefully those networks will facilitate collaborations, which is the focus of today. So networking is the establishment and maintenance, which is a really important part of contacts. It can be personal, professional, or a mixed of both. And we truly believe that the networks are the foundation of collaborations. And our mentees are in their third year or for PhD, relatively early in their academic careers. And some of the questions they have for the panel is really, where do we start? How do we initiate? How do we maintain and develop sustainable collaborations? Especially with other academics or industry partners when it comes to data sharing, when it comes to publications and other aspects of collaboration. So without any further ado, I'll stop sharing and we'll invite Jen to start the panel.
All right, thanks, Mige. So I'll just start with a little bit about my background. My background's in industrial engineering. I've always done healthcare applications, so most of what I talk about today will kind of be from that lens, but more applicable broadly as well. So I'm in public health sciences at School of Medicine and University of Virginia, and most of my collaborations have been within UVA and within the health system. So some of that will be related to the data questions and also within the School of Engineering. So kind of the big picture, I would say, around collaboration would be matching up these three pieces. So working style for the project or the long-term collaboration. Do you want to have collaborative work where everyone kind of works on different pieces of it themselves and helps with writing papers and writing grants and proposals, things like that? Or do you want to ask a collaborator serve as more of a consultation model, so where they provide insight, maybe provide data, but not actually doing as much of the writing and working directly with analysis and things like that? So kind of deciding what type of collaboration you want is important. Another aspect is within financial considerations. So understanding whether you or your student or the collaborator's effort need to be compensated. So just to give an example, within my department, we have kind of three models for research collaboration funding. I fall under model 1, where we write grants. So I find collaborators within the School of Medicine or across our grounds, where we write grants together, or people outside of our institution as well. There are other models where a clinical department might have a retainer, so they pay a percentage of a person's salary to collaborate with them, or there might be some other hourly wage rates paid for that effort. And maybe sometimes it's okay to do work without compensation as well. It just kind of depends on your situation. And then the third part is kind of alignment of expectations for the project or the collaboration. Are you supporting a community project? Are you trying to find a topic for your student's dissertation or thesis? Are you trying to write papers? Are you trying to write grant proposals that lead to a funded project? Kind of what's that expectation for the project? And I'll go into some more detail on these as well. So one question was around what kind of initially happened for us. So I'll just give you my initial strategies. I'm very introverted, so a lot of these are kind of more one-on-one connections, slowly kind of building up my network. So I went to NC State for my PhD, and a UNC urologist came and gave a talk. And when he found out I was going to UVA, he introduced me to a urologist colleague at UVA, and that has turned out to be a really fruitful collaboration, and we're still collaborators 11 years later now. So that was a really nice connection. Another idea within healthcare was to find clinicians that have an MPH degree or Master of Public Health, since they were more understanding of the type of modeling and methods that I was using. A more general approach is to find more senior people in your department or at your university or other connections you meet through conferences or otherwise. Senior people can serve as mentors and also open up the door for more collaborations, as well as your department heads as well. And then I also met with colleagues through the School of Engineering. And my general goal was to find people that had complementary skills. So clinicians that had problems that we could work on together, or biostatisticians that had alternative methods that they used that would be complementary to my types of methods. And I wanted to collaboratively write grants with these colleagues. So that was kind of my goal of finding these collaborations. One of the questions that came up preparing for this was around things that might sour collaborations. And so I think starting too big can be an issue. So maybe starting with writing a paper together before writing a grant proposal, or doing a small project before jumping into a larger project. Just a side note, a colleague was recently telling me that she's a mid-career person as well, but she was telling me that she had gotten a big grant with a colleague at another institution, and this was their first opportunity to work together. And there's been a lot of challenges. And I think if they had, written a paper together or started a smaller project, some of those challenges would have come to light before that bigger collaboration, and that might have been a red flag as to not proceed with a larger project. And important with this is discussing those expectations up front. So the things on the previous slide around roles, financial arrangements, things like authorship. That's, at least in healthcare, a pretty important piece about senior authorship on papers and first authorship. Things like that are important to set expectations up front, so that there aren't opportunities for conflict around these pieces later on in the collaboration. So the piece around data, I can speak to a little bit of my experience and some colleagues' experiences with this. I think, when you're trying to build relationships with nonprofits or people in industry, it takes time to build the relationships, to build trust, and to kind of, you have to be patient to build up those relationships. So especially within public health, the community-based participatory research approaches can take a lot of time, months of meetings, to kind of listen to what's going on in the organization. And that time has to be spent before any commitments can be made in terms of working together, things like that. I've been through meetings with federally qualified health centers or the local health department, and those actually never led to a collaboration. We had a lot of meetings seeking out whether it would work out to work together, and ultimately those projects didn't actually happen. You can maybe deliver on a small project to an organization to help build confidence and trust, and then maybe a bigger project could come after that. And so when you reach out to a new collaborator, you might suggest ways in which you can offer value to their organization, maybe certain insights that you could provide with your analysis, things like that. Around the data piece specifically, one question that came up was around, not being able to see the data before actually starting the collaboration. So definitely important to ask about what data fields would be available. Are they longitudinal data points, or are they just single data points in time? Can you look at a code book? And just asking more questions about how the data is collected as well. And then for different organizations, you're going to need data use agreements, probably institutional review board approval for your study or using of that data. So starting that process as early as possible is really important, because that can take months. This is kind of the question that no one asked, but I think it's important to think about as well when you're being approached by a collaborator, and what that would look like. If you're used to being the one asking for collaboration, it can be really flattering to be asked to be a collaborator for someone else. But it's important to probably take time to reply to that ask. Think about it maybe for a day or so, ask clarifying questions, and make sure that it's the right fit for you in terms of expectations, timeline, level of commitment. I would recommend having, some kind of productivity system or some system for making sure that you have time within your other commitments before you make a decision. And so getting things done is one that's influenced the way I think about my way of doing things. And avoid taking on too many small projects. Kind of balancing how many projects you have is important too. So you can really build strong connections with the collaborators you do have. And then prior to agreeing to a collaboration or even reaching out to someone, clarifying to yourself how this new project would help meet your role's expectations. So if you have tenure requirements, funding requirements for you or a student, or dissertation topics for a student, or relationship building, that community piece that we talked about. Thought I'd give like a brief, broad strokes of my collaborations over time. And this is just to show that things ebb and flow over time. These are kind of with my main collaborators. And also you can see from the first 3 years, it takes a little time sometimes to build up those initial collaborations. I felt a little bit like I was floundering in the beginning, and then things started to take off once some new collaborations came in. So it can take time to build up those initial collaborations, but keep trying, try different methods, reach out to other folks to help. And then with service or collaboration asks, I think it's always important to think about the other aspects of your life. So personal life got more complicated over these last 10 or so years for me. Service responsibilities increased over time once I had less protected time from that. So that all goes into making decisions about whether you want to start a new collaboration or not. And then finally, just around another skill that's important to learn is how to say no to potential collaborations. You can politely decline. You don't need to give a reason, but you can if you'd like to. You could ask for a different role or a less scope of a role if that's on offer. So maybe instead of helping lead a project, you can be a piece of the project or a consultant on the project instead. Some people like to say not right now because they're busy, and then maybe it's actually no or never. And so maybe really asking yourself whether it is a no or a not right now. And then I like, if possible, to suggest someone else that they might ask if I'm not able to take on the project. So that was all that I had for slides, and look forward to the chat later.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm going to stop my video so my audio is not too bad. Fantastic. I mean, I learned. I was taking notes as you were talking. Hopefully our mentees also enjoyed it. So we're moving to the next panelist, Fran. So the floor is yours.
Okay, and I think I'll show just one slide too, because no one knows who I am, and this might be helpful. Okay, so let's see if I can give you a whole screen. Okay, so this is an illustrated history of my career, and it kind of helps you understand maybe what I've done and when I've collaborated. So I've been at a number of institutions. Right now, I'm Director of Public Interest Technology at UMass, which you see over there at the end. But I've done a bunch of different things. When I got my PhD, which was in math, I started at Purdue in the computer science department, moved to UCSD, started a lab there, and then became head of the San Diego Supercomputer Center for 9 years. So I was on loan from the department. We had a tens of millions of dollars budget and hundreds of people, and we did about 100 different grants, not all of which I was a PI on in any given year. So there was a lot of collaboration in the center, mostly academic, but not entirely. I moved to RPI, became VP for research, and oversaw from an administrative viewpoint all of the research environment, and there was a lot of collaborations there. So I can talk a little bit about centers and stuff like that. I spent my sabbatical at Harvard as a Radcliffe Fellow studying the Internet of Things, which compelled me, went back to RPI and then came to UMass. As you can see on the bottom, most people throughout their academic careers change their interests. And that kind of give you whole new groups of people to collaborate with. And so, at the beginning, it was more math oriented, and then it was more high performance computing oriented, and then it was more data oriented, and now it's more public interest and social outcomes oriented. And it really gives you a whole new cast of characters. And if you're lucky, you bring a lot of those people with you. So your community doesn't just keep swapping out, it gets larger, and that gives you a whole bunch of new possible collaborators. I think it's good to have professional goals. Right now, I get to be indulgent and just do the goals that are important to me. At the beginning of your career, you really want to establish yourself. You want to get tenure, or you want to, get the management position if you're in industry, and you want to, make sure people know who you are, and your collaborations can help build that. Almost all of us, the lucky ones, have real lives. I have children, I have a kayak, I do all kinds of things I have friends. And that's really important too. So even though you tell all the work people how hard you're working all the time, which is a really good thing to tell them, you better be doing some other stuff too, because really life's not worth it without it. Okay, so that's just a goofy thing, and I'll leave it up for a bit. Okay, so let's talk about collaboration, and I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. If you have a question now, just shout on out. For me, an interesting collaboration always starts with a scientific problem I'm compelled by. It's really hard for me to put all my interest behind work where, it's just sort of checking a box. I need to get a grant, or I need to write a paper. There's got to be some problem I'm compelled by. And even in this giant public interest technology initiative, the problem I'm compelled by here is, how do we make tech good for us? And that's a real problem. And it's a problem with huge amounts of impact all over. So if you're that kind of person, starting with the problem around which you're wanting to collaborate will help you find the psychic energy to do it. You want to choose your collaborators a little bit carefully. The previous speaker, you want to certainly find people that kind of work with the kinds of things you're interested in and the questions you're compelled by. If you're lucky and if you're strategic, your collaborators will build your network. They will add value to your work. They will bring expertise that you might not have, or a point of view that you might not have. But collaborations take, like any relationships, because, ultimately a collaboration is a relationship. It takes work, and some of them work out well and some of them don't work out well. So, what are things that indicate that a collaboration can work out well? And first of all, for the question that you and your collaborators are compelled by, it's really good to be clear about what the value added for that work is for each of you. And it might be different. It might be that, for you, it sort of builds out your expertise and your curiosity about something in your area. And for them, they might be in a different area, and it builds that out. And then you kind of look at the joint questions, and it kind of helps accelerate the kinds of questions you look at even without them. It's really important for everybody to get something out of a collaboration. I mean, this is true with groups in general. You want everybody to get something where they feel like they can be a leader, or it can build their reputation or something like that. It's not a good collaboration if that only happens with some of the people. And, even with your students, it's really important when you have students who work with you that they get their name on a paper. That builds their resume and it builds their career. And especially if you have the professional culture where they can be in some, place of honor, maybe first author or whatever it is for your culture. So everybody should get something out of the collaboration. The collaboration does best if it's a stylistic fit. If you have the same approach to ethics, if you have the same kind of working style, if you have clarity in the same way, If somebody's a little, last minute and somebody else isn't, somebody's going to be frustrated. Maybe both people are going to be frustrated. If somebody's ethics are a little bit different than somebody else's ethics, that may, cause some of the collaborators to sour. So kind of getting to know somebody a little bit, and I love the idea about writing a paper first or something like that, are really good ways to collaborate. And then I would say, finally, a really important thing to think about in collaboration is what's the political ecosystems you both live in. So it may be that, you have different stakeholders. It may be that if you're collaborating with someone in industry, their boss and the priorities of the company really are very important. And you should know where you fit in there. And they should know that you're trying to get tenure, or you're trying to, build a bigger footprint in your professional community, or, whatever you're trying to do. So there are stakeholders. And you each have professional expectations, and it's good to know that they're not the same. So the last question I'll answer, and then, happy to give it to somebody else or take questions or whatever we have time for, is, so what don't you want to do in a collaboration? And I say this, I think most of us are women, and maybe we're a little bit more tend have a tendency to do this in our society. Don't be too altruistic. You need to get something out of this collaboration. If it's a senior person in your area or somebody wants you to do it, that in and of itself is not the only good reason to do it. And, make sure you get something out of it. This is your professional career. This should be a building block. That's the whole point of the collaboration. So make sure you're not too altruistic. Make sure you're not too selfish. It's like, even though it might build your career, makes it hard to look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and feel like you're exploiting somebody. So, you want to find something in between that. And I would say, just make sure that you're staying on the high road, doing high integrity things with people that you respect. And people that hopefully you like working with them so much you'd be willing to do it again. Just like any relationship, there's nothing that beats going to work and working with people that bring you joy in some professional or personal way. Nobody's mentioned this so far, and I'm not even sure I have a really good answer for this, but how do you get out of a collaboration when it's not working? And you want to exit as gracefully as possible, because your current collaborators are potential reviewers for the rest of your career. So, getting in a food fight with them is just never a really good thing. And it would be great if the collaboration was built on good communication. You could say, I love this project we've been working on, but I need to move into this other area of my, work that's really heating up now. And it's important for me to follow that. I need, I need to get tenure, or I really want to build that out, or there's a grant opportunity or something like that. So, what's sort of a good stopping place for us where we get our stuff out with our papers and stuff like that. And I don't know, I don't have great answers if you really hate each other's guts, but I do think that you should always sort of engineer the relationship so that you can get the best out of it. And if it goes south, you've got a good working relationship with the person so you can exit gracefully. And that may be a tad Machiavellian, but I like to think that it's just good professional, approach. So I'll just shut up here, and happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you so much, Fran. I'm so glad that we're recording this. By the way, we're recording this. If you haven't noticed, this is incredible. This is so much good knowledge. This is really not just for our mentees, I have to admit. This is fantastic insights for every career level, I think. All right, so without any further ado, we're moving to our third panelist. Julie, the floor is yours.
I just have the bones of some slides here, not, and the real content is in my head, for better or for worse. And I love to make my audience work. So if you can go to the chat and tell me something about who you are and what you do and where you are in that process. And that's my first question. So, and do recognize that it could appear on the recording. So make sure you keep that in mind. Thank you for going to the chat and doing that. So this is a short background on me. I got my PhD at Northwestern, my bachelor's at Georgia Tech, and I spent 15 years as a faculty at Georgia Tech in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering. And one of the things that I did while there is that I co-founded and co-directed a Center for Health and Humanitarian Systems, which is still there, but is run by one of the other co-founders, Pinar Kiskinacek. I was also, during the pandemic in 2009, I was on loan to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which also led to some collaborations. And I moved to NC State in 2017, where I am department head. I also, during the pandemic, spent a lot of time serving as a subject matter expert for media organizations and health organizations and government agencies, and can talk a little bit about that. And I am president-elect at Informs. My research interests are in health and humanitarian areas, supply chain, really public impact at the population or policy level when possible. And I'll draw upon some of those kinds of things in the collaborations that I mentioned. So there are different kinds of organizations with whom you can collaborate. So companies is an example: Amazon, IBM, Lyft, any company that you can think of is a potential collaborator. Some are easier to work with than others. I've also worked a lot with nonprofits. That's a little bit different, especially if it's a local organization that's smaller. I haven't been to my chat, but I'm not sure if people have been going there, but please do tell us who you are, and eventually we'll get to questions and things like that. Governmental agencies, I listed here: local, state, federal, but it could also be international ones. Academic collaborators, and these include lots of different ones. You do collaborate with your students when you're a faculty member. You can collaborate with people in your department or discipline. You can collaborate outside of your discipline, and that can look very different. Sometimes you have collaborators that are junior to you, and sometimes you have collaborators that are senior, and those have different elements that you might need to think about. I listed some example areas to kind of make you think about how these different kinds of collaborations might look: engineering, business, medical, social science, other types. And then I added media as well, because I found that as I served as a subject matter expert, lots and lots of times I did begin collaborations with a number of journalists and organizations. There are also different purposes for collaboration. So probably most of you are interested in research collaboration, so we can talk about that. But one can also do collaborations in the education space or in the outreaching to try to change the world and that kind of collaboration, and as well as within the scientific community, so within Informs or other organizations. So one thing to think about is, what is the purpose of a collaboration? Are you just trying to get data? Are you trying to have a better chance of success with a particular project or paper or research area, and you want to try to translate that into practice eventually? And it can make a difference to have specific kinds of collaborators when you go to some of the journals. So if you go to a medical or health journal, it can make a difference to have a medical or health co-author on your publication. So you think about those collaborations because they might lead to different things. And if you just want data, then that's different than really a deeper collaboration. So then you look for potential collaborators based on what it is that you're thinking about. And there are lots of different ways to find them. I appreciate that Dr. Lobo put some in her slides. I have found some by doing projects in classes. So senior design is something in engineering departments. And there, when we started our humanitarian center, we actually started a class and we went out and solicited projects for the class. So we did cold calls. We identified organizations that we wanted to meet with, American Red Cross, CDC, others. And then we found either a name and phone number on the internet, or we found an alum who had a connection with that organization. And through a combination of cold calls and alumni connections, we set up meetings. In those meetings, we were often asking them, you know, we would try to understand what it was they did, their organization did, what their goals were. But then we would also ask questions like, what are challenges that, you know, are really difficult or that you need to solve, not today, that has to be solved today, but rather that you might need solved over a year. What is it that keeps you awake at night? So having some of these kinds of questions, because you're trying to elicit something about both their goals and incentives and also about potential problems that you could work on together. And so one organization, a nonprofit, told us, well, we're really thinking about pandemics and food distribution. And that was the initial seed that led to lots and lots of things for us, some in collaboration with that organization and some that were jumping off points from that problem. So senior design, class projects, work the alumni network of an organization, go to events where you network. People will usually be willing to talk about themselves or their jobs. So have a few questions in your pocket that allow you to ask someone about their job and their interests. And that makes networking easier for the many, many, many people in our field who are introverted. So you explore the potential and really think about it. It's really important to understand what someone's goals and incentives are, because if I understand what a potential collaborator's goals are, then I can try to align my interests with what their interests are and what can help make them successful. And that can lead to a better collaboration. Sometimes those collaborators are just interested in papers, and that's fine too. Another way to find potential collaborators, you do some initial work and then you go to someone, an academic often, but it can be industry, and you say, look, I've been working on this. I'd like to talk to you about it and get your insights and offer, you know, the possibility of co-authoring a publication if there's a common interest in that area. So we found several co-authors that way. Grants can also be another thing that can help lead to collaborations. I will use a grant call for proposals that comes out of National Science Foundation or other organizations to then serve as the seed to help have conversations with people. I'm looking at this grant opportunity. I wanted to explore your interest to see whether you might be a good fit for it. And lots of academics are interested in going after that money. Some companies are as well. Choose your organization or individual with whom you're going to collaborate. Make sure you deliver what you promised, whatever that might be. And it's not just what you need, like you may need a paper, but maybe even the basic data analysis is something that's important to that organization or company with whom you might be collaborating. And then you repeat that process. There are several different kinds of mechanisms for collaborations. I mentioned papers, proposals. You could collaborate on a workshop. You could have a PhD student work on a problem. You could do this through a class. You can have an undergraduate researcher. And these cost different amounts of money. Some of them are free and some of them are not free, but free ones can be a way to jumpstart something, particularly if you can leverage other kinds of funding that you might have. These are some important things that I find they have to get done. They're not the exciting part, but they can be a roadblock to having the work move forward. So data confidentiality and management is one of those. We work with a lot of healthcare data. We also work with a lot of data from companies that's confidential. And so early on, I learned what the process was at my university for getting through that process. And I learned what things could make it faster and easier. You can get that kind of advice from whomever at your organization has done it before. And I even learned that, you know, if I'm going to use an agreement, that it goes through a lot faster if we started with the template from my organization rather than starting with the template from another organization. So that's one example. You might even talk about authorship and journal outlets at the beginning of the process. I can think of collaborations that went sour because people had different expectations and then those didn't work out. I mentioned incentives before. Intellectual property is another roadblock that can happen, where a company wants to keep the intellectual property, but if you're at a university, the university insists on keeping the intellectual property. So I like to get that out in the open really early on in a conversation if it's with a company, and talk about that. And there's some companies that are just almost impossible to work with in this space, and they partner with a very small number of universities, and so I wouldn't even go after some of those. And there are some of the biggest ones, and probably some that you'd like to work with, but they're probably you know, some of those are not going to share their data unless you have a really strong connection. You can also try to place students as interns at an organization. That can be another way of jumpstarting collaborations. And I mentioned some of those roadblocks. They often are related to specific documents. These documents can also take time, which is another reason I like to start them pretty early on if I'm working with a company or thinking about a proposal. Other aspects, that communication is really important. I have had collaborations that did not work out because they were expecting one thing from our collaboration meetings. I was bringing material and really thinking that this is all of us jumping in, going back and forth, but they had a very different idea of how that collaboration would progress. And they really wanted almost finished products coming to the table in those meetings. Those are two very different things. And if I had better communicated, I could have gotten a better understanding of that early on. Deliverables, you know, I mentioned data analysis. Sometimes with companies as well as with nonprofits and governments, shorter is usually better than longer. So even some high level summaries of what's happening can be useful for them. And if you're working with student teams, make sure you're managing them and these things as well. Speed, usually companies are moving much faster than academics are. So that's one to really think about and think carefully about. And you can deliver some things while still working in the background on things that might take you longer, depending on what kind of things they are. If you're working with fellow academics in a different field, then speed is a little bit you know, more consistent, but the style of working can be very different. So I do a lot of things at the last minute. I do a lot of things on deadline. There's some other people who really do things in advance. And so try to get a sense of people's personality and how they like to operate, and partly through communication. And then if there is a problem, something is not working, you know, you can try to get some outside advice from someone else who might have some experience, but then I also believe in addressing whatever that issue might be. And if I've done something wrong, I'm going to own it and tell them. And then, you know, or try to share my expectations in a way that's gentler if it's not on my side. Collaboration examples, these are just a smattering of different ones that I've had that have different flavors. So I worked in engineering ethics and I worked with philosophers, very different conferences and journal outlets. I worked with nonprofits and humanitarian organizations who often feel like academics take. And so, you know, they want people who are going to give something back to them. Healthcare agencies, including governmental ones. There are a lot of perceptions that matter in those, a lot of territory related to data, and other kinds of things that can happen in those collaborations. And then academics and other disciplines, you know, not just philosophy, but also healthcare. So mental health is one where we took a paper, we had done a lot of pre-work on that paper, and then we took it to some potential collaborators, and that led to several papers in that space. And I think that's all the formal slides I brought. Like I said, most of it's not really written down, but would love to continue the discussion with the other panelists and the other participants today.
Thank you so much, Julie. We really appreciate all three panelists. Everybody provided such valuable insights based on your years of experience. So we all appreciate it. So at this point, I would like to open it to our Q&A session. So feel free to unmute yourself. If you want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand, and we can see that you have a question. But otherwise, let's get started with the questions. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I know some of you mentees, you entered some questions in the Google Sheet. So if you want to ask those or a modified version of that, please do so. Okay, Vivian. Thank you, Vivian. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think when we, as graduate students, I'm Vivian, I'm a third year PhD student in industrial engineering at UMass. But as graduate students, starting a collaboration with faculty that is not your advisor could also be tricky, because you need to get your advisor on board, and it needs to be something that aligns with their interests and a specific area where they feel there's a need. So I wonder what advice you have for a way we could navigate that.
I'm going to say something that I forgot to say, but I think is important. Depending on where you are in your career, people will look at collaborations differently. Post tenure, when you're senior, it's not a problem. But what people want to know when you're junior is kind of who gets the credit, basically. And it's weird because it's probably completely opposite than reality. But typically when a junior person and a senior person are collaborating in many fields, it's not in everything, the senior person gets the credit. Now, typically it's the junior person doing the work. And I've had situations when I went up for tenure myself, there were, well, you collaborated with so-and-so who did what. And then at one point I had this brilliant, wonderful postdoc and he did his own work, but people erroneously assumed that I was responsible for way more than I was. And even though both of us were really clear all the way along with each other and with the rest of the world that this was his work, it took a while for people to get used to it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't ever collaborate with someone who's not who's senior, or it just means think about it. And when you're a grad student, you guys are doing a PhD, it's the forefront of research. Otherwise it wouldn't be a PhD. When you go out on the job market, people will want to know that you have done meaningful work. And so this is a time when to be careful that there is work that is clearly your own. If you do collaborate, make sure it enhances your resume, doesn't replace the work that you've done on your own or that can be attributed to you in your resume. When you get your first jobs, then you think about who should collaborate. But really, up until the time you get tenure, make sure that there's a body of work that people associate with you. You're the lead, you're the, when you have students, then you get to be the senior person. But make sure there's a body of work that that people can associate with it. Otherwise, some of those cultural stuff, and I actually don't know in your field what the cultural wins are like, but that has been my experience. So be a little careful of that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't collaborate, just means you should get the credit you deserve.
I can take the question that was asked about collaborating with someone not your advisor. One thing is sort of useful, I think, to understand the context. Is your advisor paying you, or do you have funding that's outside of your advisor? That can make a difference, because if you're adding on another collaboration, then you're probably spending less time with your primary advisor. So that's one thing to think about. I have seen some people do it, and it's relatively less common, I would say, generally, but think about the norms of that department, of that field. When I have seen people do it, they had discussions with their advisors, and they're open about it. You don't want your advisor thinking that you're going behind their back on this. You can also talk to the potential collaborator that maybe it's something that came up in a class, and think carefully about why you want that collaboration, because you can also use that when you're advocating to your advisor that you want to do that. I know in some cases the advisors are not very happy about it, and I saw the graduate student do it anyway, and in the end it was fine. And in other cases, maybe it was different than that. But really try to understand your advisor's perspective as well as the other person, the other collaborator.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks. That was very helpful.
Thank you so much. Ruby, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks again for all the panelists for your great sharing. Learned a lot. And I have a question. I think Julie might be, I don't know, based on what you shared today, might be a better person to answer this, because I am also interested in doing research with nonprofit operations. So I've had one experience of reaching out to a local charity and trying to collaborate with them. And I think you mentioned that they kind of think academia is like taking. So I wonder, like, could you please share like more like a systematic experience that you can conclude based on your past experience working with nonprofits? Why do they think of us that way? And then what are the things that we can do to prevent them from thinking of us that way?
Yeah, and the organizations that said that tended to be the international non-governmental organizations in the humanitarian space, the UN agencies and the other big ones that are operating worldwide. I have not heard that as much from healthcare organizations. You can also have it from community organizations, a local food bank, or whatever it might be. But it depends on their experiences. I've also seen lots of senior design projects in those local community organizations that have delivered what I think is real value to those organizations, and that has been very helpful. And that is not necessarily research, but that is a way of getting a foot in the door and building a collaboration and giving something concrete to that organization while still building that larger collaboration. And I tell students, if they're working on a student team on a senior design project or similar, that it's not just the final project that is valuable to that organization. There's a lot of the data analysis that can be useful to them, things that we might think of as just a part of that process, making some descriptive data, pictures and charts and things like that. But you're learning things about that system with fresh eyes that organization may not know. And so summarize some of the insights that you've seen from looking at that system. So those are among the things that you can help to provide those organizations.
And also, so my past experience working with the local charity was not like, did not really lead to anything, but we've made effort to have meetings for like, probably we had 4 or 5 meetings. We signed agreements to get access to their data. But then eventually we realized that the sample size of the data was so small that we were not able to use it. So I kind of feel bad about it right now. And I don't really know like what to do after that. We just kind of like let it cool off, and then nobody really talked to each other anymore. But like, what is like the best advice you have for me right now, like to either keep this relationship going for future opportunities, or just to end this peacefully, maybe?
Yeah. Well, and so even if that research was not good for, that data was not good for research, if there's even just a few things that you learned from looking at that data, then share those with the organization. Or if the organization is struggling with challenges that you think someone has solved in a different way, share some of that other information with them. So if I see I'm reading the news and I see something that I think would be really important for that organization to think about, I might send them that information or point them to another kind of opportunity, and be honest about it. You can always go back to them and just say, look, I really wanted to do this, but it looks like that data would not allow us to do as much as we thought we would. Try to pair a student intern with them for the summer who can do various kinds of things for them. And in the future, try to get a better understanding of what data is like before you spend lots of time getting to that point. And that does happen, and you learn some questions to ask, try to understand if it's individual level data or if it's aggregate data, what's the time basis for it, lots of different things as you get more and more exposure to that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I know Yeonju, you had your hand up. You can go next.
Thank you for the presentations. I was interested in knowing whether, so I think like there is like broadly two approaches when you're approaching like industry partners or nonprofit organizations. You can have specific research question in your mind and start with that, or you can just like start talking. Maybe you're interested in their business model, you have some connections in mind, so like you can just start talking without any specific research questions in mind. I have been talking with industry partners with like both approach. I was interested in knowing, like I was curious like what your general approach is and how those two turns out, and like what would be more successful ways of doing it in your opinion.
I think you can have productive conversations that don't lead to collaborations and that don't lead to anything, but ends up in expanding your network in unusual ways. And so let me just step back. Somebody else can maybe answer how you kind of set it up for the collaboration, but let me just step back and say every conversation you have with someone in your professional sphere is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to establish some credibility for who you are, for the work you do, to establish yourself as someone who's interested in their work, who's curious about their work. And you might be surprised at the number of those conversations that lead to other conversations or other things where you just get to know each other. So I don't know, some people call it an elevator pitch. I've never thought of it that way myself, but it's good practice to have what one could think of as the reception conversation. You're at a reception, you meet someone, you've got, an hors d'oeuvre or a drink in your hand, or you're staring at a poster or something like that. And to just sort of practice talking in a way that's memorable, if you can, like to say who you are and what you're doing and the kinds of things you're curious about. Have some questions about what they're doing. Everyone loves to talk about themselves. So this is, it's sort of great to say, what are you doing? Or, is your company interested in this? Or tell me a bit about the kind of job you do. Or, there's lots of questions you can ask. And don't wait for the high stakes reception to do that. You can practice this with your friends. You can practice this with the people in your classes. You can practice this with professors in your department. But, shockingly for all of us in STEM fields, the social skills matter. The soft skills matter, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. You have to find a way to show up in the professional sphere, how to present yourself, how to present your work if you're, so you look credible. And all of those things. And that's worth spending a little time thinking about, how do you want to sort of show up in those environments and practicing doing that. And, it'll be time well spent.
In the interest of time, we're just going to let Vanessa ask the last question and wrap up. But it's wonderful to see that people are asking questions in the chat and getting answers as well. So Vanessa, please ask your question.
Hi, thanks for today's talk. My question was just, I was curious to understand the relationship between like collaborations and opportunities in the job market. So if you're looking for, say, a job in the industry, does it really matter to your employers if you have collaborations only within academia, or would it also matter to them that you have collaboration with other industry partners as well?
So as I understand the question, it's about getting hired and what makes you more likely to get hired. Did I understand that correctly, Vanessa?
Correct.
Yeah. So it depends on what kind of job you're looking for, and it depends on what that organization is looking for. Amazon will hire a lot of PhD students. I've seen them both hire theoretical students that did not have collaborations, and in some cases hire ones that did. I think their organization tends not to put as much value on whether you had specific collaborations in advance, is maybe more driven by whether your type of research solves a problem that they have. If you want one of the prevention effectiveness fellows at the CDC, you almost have to have worked on healthcare problems that had some kind of data that you can write about or talk about in that process. And so there it's really important. For an academic organization, it will depend greatly on whether you're theory or applied. All of them can be good depending on what job you're interested in.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just to be mindful of everyone's time, we're going to finish on time. So this was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Jen, Julie, and Fran. We learned so much. I can speak for myself. I learned a lot. And thank you for your time and service, helping our PhD students and our faculty, especially junior faculty, learning from your experience. So for our mentees, if you have any other questions that you can think of after the panel that you wish you had asked, please email us, myself, Shika, Shirin, or Rachel, and we're more than happy to forward it to our panelists and follow up. Other than that, then just stay tuned. There will be another meeting in June, another workshop. So we hope to see all of you again in June. So take care, and thank you so much again for joining. Bye.